A woman stands at the back of a crowd on a grassy slope. In Galilee, she is nobody. No land, no title, no voice that carries past the people in front of her. Her husband died 2 winters ago, and she has been overlooked ever since, the way the world overlooks people who have nothing left to offer it. She is one of the gentle. She is one of the humble. She has never heard the word for it. But she is the reason that word exists. And today on this hillside, a teacher is speaking. No throne, no army, no press team, just a voice that carries over the grass the way a rumor carries through a town. And out of that open-air sermon comes a promise so audacious that the woman stops breathing for a second. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Think about what he is actually saying. Not the conquerors, not the wealthy, not the powerful, not the people who win the argument, or the promotion, or the race. The gentle, the quiet ones, the ones who never push to the front of the line. The widow at the back of the crowd. Those people, he says, are going to inherit the earth. You would think that promise would be the anthem of the whole church. You would think we would sing it from the rooftops. But here is what most people never realize. Somewhere along the way, the church quietly swapped it. Walk into almost any congregation and listen to what we sing. This world is not my home. We are just passing through. Heaven is where I am bound, and there is truth in that. There really is. Precious truth. But notice what happened. Jesus promised the meek the earth, and we turned around and told each other the real prize is a ticket out of it. So which is it? Did the teacher misspeak? Did we hear him wrong? Or did we trade a kingdom for a boarding pass? That is what we are going to find out. We are going to take one short sentence and follow it back through the original language, through the ancient scrolls, through the people who first heard it, and find out what Jesus was actually promising. Because the answer is bigger than you think, and it changes what you are actually waiting for. Let us start where Jesus started. The sentence sits inside the most famous sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. A hillside address to a crowd with no seminary degrees, no study Bibles, no commentary apps, just a teacher, and ears willing to hear. And at the very top of that sermon, he opens his mouth and he blesses people. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle. 9 blessings in a row. We call them the Beatitudes. And the 4th one is the one we keep skipping past. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Here is the thing about that verse. We have heard it so many times that it has gone smooth, like a coin passed through 1,000 hands, until you cannot read the date on it anymore. You know the verse. You could say it in your sleep, which means you have never actually heard it. So let us slow down and read it the way it deserves to be read. Blessed, gentle, inherit the earth. Gentle, inherit the earth. Every word in that sentence is doing heavy lifting, and 2 of those words are doing more work than you have ever been told. The word gentle, or meek depending on your translation, and the word inherit, because the English word meek sounds like what it means to us, weak, timid, the person who never speaks up, the person who lets life walk all over them. And if that is what the verse means, then the promise makes no sense at all. Why would the world hand its keys to the people who never ask for them? It would be like a will leaving everything to the one relative who never visited. And the word inherit is not the word we think it is either. Put those 2 words back together, and this short, overfamiliar sentence becomes something else entirely. It becomes a quiet explosion. But before we get there, you need to know something about the crowd that was listening. They did not hear this verse the way you hear it. They heard an echo, a song they already knew. And that echo is the key to everything. Here is where the story gets interesting. The Greek word behind gentle or meek is praus, and in the world where Jesus spoke, that word was used for something very specific. A horse, a stallion. Imagine a war horse. Raw muscle, fire in its veins, strong enough to carry a soldier into a line of spears. Strong enough to carry a soldier into a line of spears. Now imagine that horse bridled, trained, reined in, Every bit of that power still there, but under control. That is praus. That is the word Jesus chose. Not weakness. Power with a bit in its mouth. The ancient philosopher Aristotle wrote about this exact quality. He called it the middle between two extremes. On one side, a man who explodes at everything, rage with no governor. On the other side, a man who never gets angry at anything, a man with no spine. And in the middle, Aristotle said, is the one who gets angry at the right things, in the right way, at the right time. That middle man is praus. Now here is what makes this even more surprising. Open almost any English Bible, and you will not always see the word meek. Some translations say gentle. Some say humble. The version we read from at this channel, the World English Bible, renders it this way. Blessed are the gentle. Same Greek word. Different English clothes. Different English clothes. And that is not a mistake. It is honesty. Because the word is bigger than any one English word can carry. Meek misses the power. Gentle misses the strength. Humble misses the fire. Humble misses the fire. Put all three together and you start to get the shape of it. Power. Fully present. Fully controlled. Fully at the disposal of its master. That is the person Jesus is blessing. And if you have always been told your gentleness is your weakness, hold that thought, because the word is still changing. Now look at the second word, and the whole sentence tilts. Inherit. The Greek word is kleronomeo, and in the world Jesus lived in, an inheritance was not something you earned. It was not a wage for good behavior. It was something you were born into. A son does not negotiate for his father's estate. He does not climb for it. He does not compete for it. He receives it, because of whose child he is. Put it together now. Blessed are the powerful who have chosen to be gentle, for they shall receive, as heirs, the earth, not win it. Receive it, not seize it. Inherit it. That is the sentence Jesus actually spoke, and the crowd on that hillside knew exactly where he got it from. The crowd knew, because the Psalms were the Psalms they grew up on. And hundreds of years before Jesus stood on that hillside, a psalmist wrote almost the same sentence. Psalm 37, verse 11. But the humble shall inherit the land, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. Jesus was not inventing a new promise. He was picking up an old one. He was reaching back into the songbook of his people, and pulling out a line they had been singing for centuries. And the word in that psalm for humble is anavim. And in the Old Testament, that word describes a very specific kind of person, not the self-made, not the striver, not the one who built a career and a reputation and a retirement plan. The anavim are the poor, the afflicted, the crushed, the people who have nothing to lean on except God, the widow with no one to defend her, the laborer with no land to his name, the exile with no home to return to, the person whose hands are empty, because life took everything and left nothing behind. These are the anavim. And here is what is so strange. The Bible keeps promising the land to these people. Not to the conquerors, not to the ones who grabbed it, to the humble, to the ones who could not possibly take it for themselves. And that makes no sense at all, unless you understand how the land actually works in the story. Because the land was never something Israel took. It was something God gave, a gift. Every single year they were told to remember, you did not earn this. You did not build these cities. You did not plant these vineyards. The Lord your God gave it to you. The land in the Old Testament is not a prize for the strong. It is an inheritance for the dependent. And the anavim are the ones who know, better than anyone, that they are dependent, because they have nothing else. Now watch what happens when you carry that echo forward. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth," every Jewish ear on that hillside hears a promise they already knew. The land, the gift, the anavim. But Jesus does something with it that no one expected. He expands it. He does not say land. He says earth. The promised land was a piece of geography, a strip of real estate the size of a small country. Jesus opens his mouth and hands the whole world to the gentle. The map just got bigger than anyone imagined, and the crowd might have wondered what that meant. But they also might have remembered the strangest detail in their entire story. The meekest man who ever lived. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Now the man Moses was very humble, above all the men who were on the surface of the earth. Think about that. The Bible literally calls Moses the most humble man on the face of the earth. And now remember what that humble man did. He walked into the palace of the most powerful empire in the ancient world and told Pharaoh to let his people go. He raised a staff, and the sea split in two, and a nation walked through on dry ground while the army that hunted them was swallowed by the water. He stood on a mountain while the ground shook and the voice of God spoke out of the fire. He carried a people through a whole generation of wilderness, feeding them, leading them, forgiving them when they turned against him again and again. That is what the most humble man on earth looked like. Not a doormat, a man with a staff in his hand and fire in his message. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. When his own brother and his own sister spoke against him, when his own family attacked his position, the Bible records that Moses did not defend himself. He did not fight for his own name. He fell on his face before God, and he let God fight for him. That is the shape of biblical meekness, not the absence of strength, the surrender of strength. You keep the power, you hand over the steering wheel, and the reason that matters is this. The humble man was the one God could trust with the heaviest assignment on earth. The gentle woman is the one God can use to free a nation. Meekness is not what disqualifies you from the big moments. It is what qualifies you for them. Because the meek are the ones who will not steal the glory. They are the ones who will point to the one who actually did the work. Moses was not born mild. He was forged. And every one of us can learn the same posture. Now Moses was the meekest man in the Old Testament, but he was only a shadow of the one who was coming. Because centuries later, the most powerful person in the universe showed up on earth. And here is how he came. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to you. He is righteous and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, not a war horse, not a chariot, a donkey, the animal of a servant. And Matthew chapter 21, verse 5, records the same moment. Jesus enters Jerusalem the way the prophet said he would, lowly. On a donkey. Now pause on that for a second. The one who spoke galaxies into existence with a word. The one who calmed a storm with 3 syllables. The one who would walk out of a tomb 3 days after they killed him. That one arrives on a donkey. That is God's idea of a king, not arriving to seize, arriving to serve. And then Jesus opens his mouth and describes himself. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 29, he says of himself that he is gentle and humble in heart. The creator of the universe looks at a crowd and says, "This is what I am like. Gentle, humble, dintel, humble." Now here is the surprise. Jesus is not a mild man. He is the man who walked into the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers. Matthew chapter 21, verse 12. He is the man who called out the religious leaders to their faces. He is the man who will one day return as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is not a man who could not be angry. This is a man who had all the power in the universe and refused to use it to grab. He did not seize the throne. He did not strike the empire. He did not call down the legions of angels, he told Peter, were standing by. He let them nail him to a cross. And he hung there, meek, and he inherited the earth. Because the earth does not belong to the ones who take it. It belongs to the ones who gave his life for it. That is the meekest man who ever lived. Power, fully present, fully controlled, fully surrendered to the will of his Father. And here is what that means for the promise. The one who inherits the earth is the one who did not grab it. Which raises the question we have been circling the whole time. If the meek inherit the earth, then why does the church keep talking only about heaven? Let us be fair to the church. Because when most of us hear that Jesus promised the earth, our first question is an honest one. Wait, I thought we were going to heaven. And that is not a bad question. And it is not an unbiblical hope. The Apostle Paul wrote about his own desire to depart and be with Christ, which he said was far better. Philippians chapter 1, verse 23. And he wrote that, to be away from the body is to be at home with the Lord. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8. That is real. That is precious. Millions of people have held on to it at a graveside, and it held them. We are not taking that away. Not for a second. But here is what most people never realize. Heaven is not the end of the story. It is not even the main event. It is the first chapter of a much longer book. Because the Bible's final picture is not a disembodied soul floating on a cloud forever. The Bible's final picture is a new heaven and a new earth. Revelation chapter 21, verse 1. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and the sea is no more. And then verse 3. I heard a loud voice out of heaven saying, Behold, God's dwelling is with people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and God himself will be with them as their God. Do you hear what that is saying? God does not take us up to heaven and close the door behind us. Heaven comes down. The dwelling of God descends to the earth, and God lives with his people, in a renewed world, in resurrected bodies, at a table that never ends. The Apostle Paul put it this way in Romans chapter 8, and I am summarizing here, not quoting word for word. He wrote that the whole creation is groaning, waiting with eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. That word, groaning, matters, because it means the earth is not garbage to be thrown away. It is a patient, waiting for its own restoration. Creation itself, Paul says, will be delivered from the bondage of decay. The forest you love, the mountain that made you feel small in the best way, the ocean you could stare at for hours and still not believe it was real. That is not collateral damage in God's plan. That is the patient, waiting for the children of God to show up and inherit it. Now, I want to be honest about one thing, because this is where Christians can get tangled. Different faithful traditions have different views on how the end times unfold, and this channel is not going to settle that argument. What is not debatable in Scripture is the destination, resurrection, a renewed creation, God dwelling with his people forever. So here is the reversal that changes everything. We have been telling each other that the gospel is an evacuation plan, a rescue boat leaving a burning world. But Jesus did not promise a rescue out of the earth. He promised an inheritance of the earth. The promise is not escape. The promise is arrival. God is not abandoning this world. He is coming back to it, and he is bringing his people with him, to live in it forever, the way he always meant for it to be. Now, here is something worth sitting with for a moment, because this promise did not sound like poetry to the people who first died for it. Imagine the city of Rome. A generation after Jesus spoke those words, believers are being hunted, arrested, tried, executed. The empire that ruled the world is showing them exactly what happens to people who refuse to bow. And in that world, in basements and catacombs and rented rooms, they whisper the words of a teacher from Galilee. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Think about what that meant to them. The most powerful empire in history was crushing them under its boot. And their hope was not a ticket out of the world. It was a promise that the world itself would be theirs, that the empire would not have the last word, that the gentle ones, the hunted ones, the forgotten ones, would one day stand on the soil of a renewed earth and see who actually inherited it. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is an inference. We do not have their sermons recorded, but we do know what they were willing to die for. And they did not die for a boarding pass. They died for a king who had promised them the earth. The promise was not made for comfortable people who wanted a nicer afterlife. It was made for the crushed. Remember the anavim, the humble, the afflicted, the ones who have been stepped on, the ones who are barely holding on, the ones who have prayed for the storm to stop, and instead got the strength to walk through it, the ones who have been lied about, passed over, written off, and forgotten. That is who the promise is for. That is who the meek are, not people who had an easy life and chose to be polite about it. People who have been through the fire and came out gentle instead of bitter. That is the most impressive thing a human being can become. And the Bible says the earth belongs to them. That leaves one question hanging. How do you inherit something you did not earn? Remember the word. Kleronomeo, to inherit. And in the world Jesus lived in, that word meant something very particular. An inheritance is not a salary, it is not a prize, it is not a reward for performance. An inheritance is what a child receives because of whose child they are. And here is the scandal of the whole thing. In the Bible, The people who inherit are not the ones who deserve it. They are the ones who belong. Galatians chapter 4, verse 7. So you are no longer a bondservant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Think about what that means. You do not become an heir by being impressive. You become an heir by being brought into the family, and the family of God is not a country club with a membership committee. It is a rescue mission that adopts the one who has spent their whole life feeling like the runt of the litter, the one who never had the right credentials, the one who has been waiting their whole life for someone to look at them and say, "You belong." That is who gets the inheritance. Not because they earned it, because the Father decided to. And now you can see why meekness is the posture of an heir. Why do the gentle inherit? Because the gentle are not trying to earn the earth. They are not fighting for it. They are not climbing over each other to get to the front of the line. They already know the inheritance is theirs, not because of what they have done, because of whose they are. The arrogant man is clawing for a piece of what he thinks he has to seize. Look at him, fists full, nails dirty, afraid that if he stops climbing, someone else will take his place. The meek man is standing still, open-handed, waiting for what his Father already promised him. And the difference is not effort. It is trust. So when Jesus says, "The meek will inherit the earth," he is not describing a reward for nice people. He is describing the family. The gentle are the children, and the children receive everything. Which brings us to one more question. If meekness is this strong, trusting, power under control thing, then what does it actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon? Here is where it gets personal, because most of us have a picture of the meek person, and it is usually wrong. We picture someone who never disagrees, someone who apologizes for existing, someone who lets everyone else make the decisions and then quietly resents them for it. And that is not meekness. That is fear wearing a nice mask. True biblical meekness has nothing to do with being a pushover. It has everything to do with where you put your power. Think about Jesus again, the most gentle man who ever lived. And he is the same man who walked into the temple and flipped the tables. Why? Because the anger was not about him. The money changers had turned his Father's house into a den of thieves. That was worth being angry about. And so he was, not out of control, fully in control. Righteous anger, in the right place, at the right time, for the right reason. That is the middle path Aristotle described. That is the meekness of Jesus. So what does that look like in your life? First, you hold your strength. You are not a doormat. You have gifts. You have convictions. You have a voice. Meekness does not remove any of that. It organizes it. Second, you surrender the outcome. You speak the truth. You stand your ground. You do the hard thing. And then you let God handle the results. The arrogant person has to win, because their identity is on the line. The meek person can lose the argument and still sleep at night, because their identity was never in the argument. Third, you refuse to grab. The world tells you that the way to inherit is to take, to claw, to get yours before someone else gets it first. The meek are the ones who say, "I do not have to take it. It is mine. My Father promised it to me." And that single change in posture changes everything. It changes how you treat the coworker who takes credit for your work and smiles while they do it. It changes how you answer the insult that is begging for a response. It changes how you face the season that is crushing you. The door that will not open, the news you did not want, the prayer that feels like it is bouncing off the ceiling. You stop fighting like a squatter. You start waiting like an heir. So what does it look like to live like an heir now? Not after you die, not in some distant future. Today, in the life you are actually living. Start at the very beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. When God made humanity, he gave them a task. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, work it, keep it, steward it. And here is something worth sitting with. That mandate was never canceled. It was interrupted. It was broken. It was twisted. But it was never abandoned. The whole story of the Bible is God getting his original plan back on track. Picture the woman from the hillside. She has no land, she has no field of her own, but she has a pot by her door, and she grows herbs in it. She has 2 hands that still know how to plant, and every seed she puts in the ground is a small act of faith that the earth is going to keep its promises. That is what the meek do. They tend the little patch of the world that is in front of them, because they know who owns the whole thing. The earth you live on right now is not a holding cell you are waiting to escape. It is the workshop where you practice being an heir, the garden you tend, the neighbor you help, the work you do with your hands, the kids you raise, the broken thing you repaired, the lonely person you sat with when everyone else walked past. That is not wasted time spent waiting for heaven. That is the early draft of your inheritance. That is the early draft of your inheritance. Because if God is going to hand you a renewed earth, He is going to raise you here as someone who knows how to tend it. Every act of care is a rehearsal. Every seed you plant is a prophecy. Every time you choose faithfulness over comfort, you are learning the grammar of the world that is coming. Which brings us back to the hillside. The woman at the back of the crowd. She is still there in this picture. Still small. Still overlooked. Still nobody, by the world's accounting. But she heard the promise. She heard it the way only the anavim can hear it, as news for her. And here is the thing. The story does not end with the loud people. It never did. It ends with the gentle people receiving everything. The hope of the Bible was never a ticket out of the earth. It is a new heaven and a new earth, and God dwelling with His people in it forever. The resurrection is not a detour. It is the destination. Creation is not abandoned. It is groaning for its redemption, and the meek are not the losers of the story. They are the heirs. So why does the church talk so much about heaven? Maybe because we forgot that the heaven we are waiting for is not the place we go when we die. It is the place God brings with Him when He returns, and the people who will inherit it are not the ones who clawed their way up. They are the ones who trusted their Father and let Him handle the results. One day the sea will be no more, and the dwelling of God will be with people, and the woman from the hillside will walk into a garden that has no weeds and no grief and no winter. And she will finally understand what the teacher meant on that grassy slope. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Not because they took it, because it was always theirs to receive. The promise was standing on the hillside 2,000 years ago. It is standing in the groaning of creation right now, and it will be standing when the new earth dawns, and the gentle open their eyes and see what they inherited, the world, the whole world. That is what Jesus promised. That is the promise you are waiting for, and it is bigger than a boarding pass. It is a homecoming.